welcome to the LearnOps Leadership Series. Today I have the pleasure of meeting Chrissie Leibman, who's a senior L&D leader at companies that included The Gap, WeWork, McDonald's, and currently the Aspen Group. Chrissie has also been a CEO and the founder of the Sports Club of America back in the days. So, Chrissie, my first question is, how did you go from being a founder and CEO into learning and development?
Yeah, I actually got into learning and development before I became a founder and a CEO. Sports Club of America was an idea I came up with some coworkers during a happy hour, and we decided to take a good idea and see what we could make of it. And it became sort of a fun social club on the side. I think one of the things I love about learning and development is that it connects you to people and it lets you sort of have communities around shared interest. And Sports Club was sort of a social expression of that in its own way.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll save the conversation for another day about what that was. I'm super curious. My brother's a founder of a sports tech company as well.
Very cool.
Well, interesting. So you mentioned that you were in learning and development before then. So how did you get into the industry? I'd love to learn about the story behind that.
Yeah, I think like a lot of learning professionals, I had a passion for learning and I had a desire to kind of get into the space, but I didn't really know how to do it. And I was fortunate. One of the amazing things about working at Gap and large companies like that is that you get the opportunity to take on a lot of stretch assignments or sort of to take passions and figure out if they can become careers. And Gap was a place that enabled that for me. So I started in a completely different side of the business. And as a stretch assignment, I took on onboarding new hires to my function, which gave me exposure to the learning team. It gave me the ability to play with a passion and see if there was something else really there. Um, Funny enough, when I was going through the interview process, back then, it was a while ago, interview processes were really long. And about halfway through the interview process, I literally said to the panel, like, I love that we're having these conversations. I'm so excited, but I also get that there are really qualified people with PhDs in education and decades of experience. So I'm not entirely sure why you're still talking to me. Um, Obviously, I progressed to the final round of those interviews. And the first question they asked me is, how are you feeling? And I said, I'm so confused. Like, I know the other people you passed on for this role. And they said, you have a knack and an affinity for how people learn, and you might not know all the terms and you might not know all the words, but we can't give somebody else that knack. And we can give you all of the confidence to know that you've got this. And so really it was someone taking a chance on me and saying, like, let us help you see in you what we see in you. And the rest is sort of history for me.
Wow, that's a great story. I love that. And so fast forward today, and you've been involved in very impressive companies with very complex operations. When you look at the industry over the last several years, what are some of the biggest changes that you've noticed when it comes to learning and development?
Yeah, I think a couple big ones. So obviously, learning's been modernizing for a really long time. That's been happening almost the 20 plus years I've been in it as a continuous trend. Where we're going to be in a couple years doesn't even exist yet. So that idea of sort of always reinventing. I think the divide between work and life has also gotten a lot tighter and smaller over the years. So how people learn in life is also now how they learn at work. So those microties kind of on demand, right when you need it. If you're fixing an appliance at home, you go on YouTube and find somebody else who can show you how to do it in a matter of minutes. You're seeing more and more of that also come into how people learn at work. So less big programs, less big events, and more sort of exactly what you need in small doses right when you need it. I think the power of community and sort of social channels, like us looking to others versus a pool of facilitators or a pool of experts. The world is sort of now all students and also all teachers. So that social element has played up quite a bit. And I think, again, people's desire to invest in not only who they are at work, but who they are in life. We're continuing to see that grow too. People want companies that care about them as a total person, not just an employee that's there to do a specific function.
No, that's interesting. And given that we're modernizing, and we have been, but particularly because of digital transformation, what has happened post kind of pandemic. Do you see L&D teams structured differently today than in the past? And if so, in what way?
Yeah, so I would say in my career, I've seen learning organizations themselves transform. At the Aspen Group, we're on our own journey to transform our learning organization as well. I think what you see are bigger investments in areas that are enablers of learning versus just big focuses on content itself. So content is still incredibly important because the learning we bring, the lessons we teach, the behaviors we see, the mindsets we cultivate, those things matter. What you're seeing also start to rise are things like learning technology, learning analytics, things that give us new ways to bring that content to life. Instructional design is also changing. If you think about how the psychology of learning is adjusting, you want people who can kind of constantly stay on how are adults learning information, processing information, retaining information. So I think you have what you've always had in learning, passionate people who want to bring subject matter expertise to people in a really approachable way. But you also have deep expertise in things like specialties of learning, like technology is a really good example of you could teach the same thing a zillion different ways now, and you want experts who can help you figure out not only the best content, but also the best mechanism.
And you mentioned that you're changing things up in your current role as well. How's your team structured? Do you have particular partnerships with the business? Does the L&D function play a role in supporting the business strategy or performance improvements?
Yeah, I've always believed in, and throughout my entire career in learning, I would say your best learning strategies are always the ones that are deeply integrated with the business. So that partnership is insanely important. It always has been, it always will be, so that your learning is in service to where the company is going, what's important to its employees. And you're sort of preparing people for the future before you arrive at that future. So that synergy is incredibly important. As learning professionals, we have a lot of skill in how you craft and cultivate a learning, but we rely deeply on subject matter expertise to have the right messaging, the right content, the right insight. So those partnerships are also essential. I think, learning without a subject matter expertise becomes potentially something that's intriguing, but maybe not valuable. And so we rely really closely on our partners to make sure we're instilling the right insight or we're cultivating the right behavior. We just partner with them to do it in a way that's approachable, retainable, meaningful to the learner versus overwhelming if you just come from a point of expertise only.
That makes a lot of sense. So, and how do you know where to get access to the subject matter expertise? If we look at the process more particularly, do people come to you with a challenge, some sort of intake, where you can then collaborate, and once you start getting to the part of the process where you're solutioning, what where do you look for the subject matter expertise in your world?
Yeah, I think using Aspen as an example, we have expertise in all sorts of different dimensions. So, on the clinical side, we have access to some of the best world class clinicians who we can help take their expertise and deliver that at scale, right? So, we can say, how do we take something and make it accessible and meaningful to a large group of people? I think in other cases, we rely on our experts to understand the divide from where we are to where we aspire to get to. And they help us understand um, what's blocking us today from achieving that full potential. And the partnership comes in us helping say, something might look good on paper or it might make sense in a flow chart. We bring in the lens of how does a human actually move through that experience? Like it might fit nicely into a table or a chart, but that's not the way a human being is going to process that journey. And I think that's where the value in the partnership comes in is they can give us expertise and insight that frames the challenge or sort of pinpoints the opportunity. We bring expertise on how do you actually move humans in a meaningful way from that point A to that point B, or how do you help them see the roadblock as something achievable or overcomable in a way that motivates them to act and to put energy and effort against moving through where they are to where we believe they can get to. So there's a lot of different ways it happens. But again, I think that collaboration and that partnership is always part of the secret sauce. One without the other is never as strong as the two are together.
That's really interesting. Um, so you're starting to partner with people real early on the process to get their support, even thinking about what's the intended outcome that we're looking to achieve, and then looking back to the beginning and designing the experience to achieve the outcome. So what type of operational challenges have you seen, like that? It seems like it, a lot of people would take more of a waterfall approach, which I would never recommend as well, where, they think they know the outcome and they're just going to go and design that. Um, you know, it, Working like this is actually a lot more efficient so that you can apply the learnings and make sure you're not making assumptions along the way and iterate quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say you hit a keyword there at the end, iterate. So one of the things I think has changed drastically in learning over the past couple decades is there's a lot less sort of perfecting behind the scenes and these big moments where learning gets revealed, and there's a lot more co-creation with the learner themselves. We do that all the time. We'll put out a solution. Again, we feel really solid about the solution. There's that deep partnership. There's thoughtful rigor in the instructional design. There's again, deep thinking into how it comes to life through different modalities. But we learn alongside the learner. So we see, where are they responding to this? Where are light bulbs going off? Where are they getting stuck? Where do we lose their engagement or their interest? And we're constantly able to then go back and tweak and say, like, okay, if we did this instead of that, does it drive a different experience for the learner? Does it create faster retention? Do we head off a conversation or a question because we've already preempted that for the learner? And every time we do that, we get a little bit better and better. Or we might try something over a different horizon of time. So we might microtize it into different moments to see, like, does that help the learner move through it more seamlessly? Or there's cases where we think we've deconstructed the expertise from a SME, but maybe not entirely in a way that's relatable for someone who doesn't have that expertise yet. So that constant iteration and kind of tweaking and tinkering with things is where I think you see a lot of solutions get better over time versus this perfect solution that comes out once that nails everything from the start. Technology is also a huge enabler in that. It's a lot easier to play around with things these days than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. The systems and platforms are meant to be more iterative. And then you have all sorts of really cool emerging technology that helps us be even better in that space. One of my favorites that's just starting to get there are sort of biometric overlays on virtual learning, where you can literally get a heat map of the engagement of the person on the other end. So we can see, like, oh, wow, the screen's all green. They're intrigued, they're engaged, they're thinking this through. Or the screen just went yellow and red, like somewhere along the way we just lost them. Or this isn't interesting enough to hold their attention, which gives us insights to go back and say, okay, so knowing what we know now about their experience, what do we do from here to make it even better?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it sounds like the team is really acting like these product managers, right? And I talked about that in the series previously. The way that learning and development should be working, which you are, is very similar to product management functions in software or technology companies as well. And for example, a product manager might have that biometric overlay on their product to see how users are interacting with the product, where the buttons should be to optimize the user experience. And so it seems
Exactly.
like
Yep.
you're doing that.
Yeah, I
Well,
think for
so
us it is that, and we bring the lens of the learner into that, right? So we're the advocate that sort of, like someone does for the consumer to optimize their experience, we're constantly thinking about what would make this even better if for the learner.
Awesome. And you talked about, you didn't call it feedback loops, but you talked about iterating and getting feedback along the way. And so, where do you plant these feedback loops? How quickly are you getting the feedback? Is it just at evaluation at the end of the program? I would assume not, based off what you said, but where can people place these feedback loops to collect the information, to iterate, and to work fast and agile like you're describing?
Yeah, I think the trick is having many of them, having them frequently, and they don't have to be big. So in some cases, we literally have a team member on delivering a learning experience and another set of team members watching that experience. So one can be focused on delivering the experience as intended for the learner. The others are in a position of let's literally watch reactions. Let's watch where the questions show comprehension or intrigue or curiosity. And so we can be our own mechanisms too, if you just, again, sort of team up and have people in different capacities for the same moment in time. You can certainly get insights too from different levels of things like Patrick, where you're looking at, again, over a horizon of time, what's happening. I think some of our best insights come from the informal kind of scrappy measurement of let's just throw something out there and watch how people respond to it and go from there. And again, a lot of little moments could be watching someone in a quick 10-minute webinar. It could be seeing what do they do with an asset you've put in your learning management system. Again, a lot of technology gives you insights about how many people click into something, how many people stay in something, how many people do things with the different activities in it. So all of those little sort of granular things, small individually, but powerful when you put them all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking in a way where I can tell that your team has created processes to create a lot of operational efficiencies, but that's not necessarily true for the industry right now. What do you think is some of the biggest challenges that's holding L&D back from true operational efficiency? And there's a lot to learn from these other departments and functions as well, but learning's still not there. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think fully agree. There's a lot going on in the learning space. I think through the pandemic, learning as a part of organizations or the demand on what people want to learn or how they want to be developed and invested in by the company is growing. So there is definitely a lot of things coming to most L&D departments. I think that process actually is really helpful. It's sort of one of those, if you can slow down enough to get your process in place, in the long run, it will give you more capacity to take all the things that are coming. But it requires that discipline to pause for a moment instead of just constantly sort of responding to what's coming so that you're kind of driving where you're going versus reacting to what's coming your way. Um, we talked about it earlier, but I think we think about learning as certainly an important and powerful people function, but it's also a business function. So the same way you would want to have operational flows prioritizing ROI on are we getting back what we're investing in a way that's meaningful. You want those same things in learning as well, because at the end of the day, we are a strategic business function as well. And operating in that way of, again, knowing what's most valuable, what's most urgent, giving yourself time to perfect where you can put something out there and let it start to sort of live earlier. I think all of those things really give you space to do the most important things, focus on fewer things and do them really well, and have sort of a long horizon of where are you taking the learner over time.
So what have you done to kind of link together the operational processes with data collection to like point back to impact or ROI? Because there's some very recent stories right now. I actually just talked about this on a Brandon Hall webinar with one of their analysts and another CLO. But I'm not sure if you saw it, but ByteDance, the parent company to TikTok, put out a press release publicly that they reorged the whole L&D function because there was too much good feel stuff happening and not enough business impact. And also there's a company that we know of, a healthcare company, where the L&D team recently got consumed by the head of business operations, who does not have an L&D background. So to me, that means that a lot of people are talking about impact, but there's still this disconnect that learning is struggling in some cases to treat the function like a business, to build the linkages to ROI and impact, and to be able to point back to show them that they're making good investments. How have you structured things to get over this? And any, I know it's a longer conversation, but any tips that people who are not there yet can think about?
Yeah, and full transparency, we're still on our own journey in that space as well. I think most organizations are. I think there's a couple things that I would say to focus on as starting points. So one is just great data, right? The more insights you can have across a variety of things. So you're going to want great learning insights of, again, not only who's taking what or who's signing up for things, but what's it doing to their confidence, what's it doing to their capabilities, what's it doing to their motivation. You have incredible insights likely in your broader people space. So what's happening with engagement, what's happening with retention, what's happening with promotions and growth. We also have a really strong partnership with our finance partners to say, can we then take things and correlate them to the business? And where learning brings an expertise is ensuring that those measures are meaningful. So for instance, if we take a learner through an experience, to believe that they're going to turn around the next day, next week, and operate differently would give us false reads or would give us sort of bad data, right? Like we know a human does not immediately turn around and like a light switch flip into performance. So we can offer guidance and expertise to say, actually you might even see a dip in performance because we're first breaking a habit before we make a new habit. So if we're too narrow in where we're looking for the return, we're going to bail on something that might actually be the right long-term play. So I think where learning brings an expertise to those partnerships is how long of a horizon should we give the learner to actually move through potentially forgetting an old skill, replacing it with a new skill, building skill and confidence through repetition before they're into actual like habitual performance. Then if you have that partnership with finance or operations or whoever holds your sort of business KPIs, you can say actually like treat that like a blackout period. We don't actually want to look at what's happening while they're in process, but when we get to here, we should start to see incremental improvements either up or down depending on what you're looking at. Use the learning data to say like the analogy we use is think of like the learning event, the asset, the class, the experience is planting a seed in the soil. Let your learning measurements be how's that seed becoming something that will sprout? And then your business data becomes over time, how deep are those roots going and how big is that plant becoming? But you want to let it sort of grow through different phases of life so that you're not measuring at the wrong moment. But I would say that variety of measurement and those partnerships become important so that you can correlate the right messages together at the right time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And what I appreciate out of what you said too is that clear collaboration and communication with the partners and the stakeholders to set the right expectations up front. Because just being an entrepreneur and in the startup world, there's always a lot of uncertainty, but it's at those times after the uncertainty where you think, hey, we should have given up, but it's right after that where the
Yep.
magic actually happens.
And I think that's where learning can play a powerful role is to not let the organization give up on the learner while they're still learning, right? Like the class, the moment, the program, the e-learning, that's actually the start, not the end. And we want to let the learner have enough time for those things to take hold. And sometimes I think, again, we can play a role in advocating for the business of don't give up on them yet. They're actually in process. They're just not there yet.
Yeah, and we hear a lot, how do we get a seat with the C-suite or whatnot? And I mean, I think you said it, having the partnerships all the way at the finance level. That's a real good way to doing that, because if finance sees the value of what the work is doing and helps you to measure that, they're going to actually defend it. In all use cases as well, right? And so that's pretty
Yeah, and
cool
if you
that you've done
complement that
that.
with always making sure your learning strategy is aligned with the business strategy, finance is also deeply invested because you're no longer something on the fringe or something the company's doing because you're supposed to invest in your talent. You're actually part of the business strategy of investing in your people is how you're investing in the growth of your business. You become a part of that conversation instead of slightly out of it. And I think, again, for us, that's how we think of learning. It's obviously something that's incredibly important to our employees, to our learner. It's also incredibly important to the business. It's how we move into the future. It's how we prepare for what's coming. It's how we continue to grow people to be ready for higher level things, new adventures, new experiences.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what type of data or operational data or performance data, do you think that C-suite or those stakeholders would want to see? When you talk about treating learning like a business, it's a function just like every other business function. What type of reporting is important back to the business?
Yeah, I think this is where I would focus on more performance data than sort of activity data. So, I'm not sure your C-suite's going to be entirely interested in how many people have signed up for something or completed something if you can't express the value of the something they've completed. The way we talk about it is if we can't say the value of the solution, it doesn't really matter how many people have been through it because we can't quantify what that volume of people means. Whereas if we could say people who've gone through this program demonstrate this behavior on a routine basis 2 months later, their confidence here goes up, which in turn leads to X, Y, and Z on your financial performance, your NPS, your engagement. They're motivated to act on something that previously they weren't motivated to do. And as a result of that, we're seeing X productivity gains or these things diminish that we're creating risk for the organization. Then you have a story to tell, right? If you can say all those things, and by the way, 1,000 people have gone through that experience and another 5,000 are about to, now there's something meaningful to that volume of activity because you're saying what becomes true as a result of it. So again, I think it depends on what learning solution you're talking about, what audience you're talking about. But if you can tell the value in terms of what it does for performance, your reach or your sort of learning base data becomes your multiplier.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what you said earlier about your partnerships early with the subject matter experts, but also thinking outcomes first. So
Correct. So
that,
one of the things we put into our process is before we even get into design and development of anything, we now always start with what's the intent of this learning, and if done well, what will be true? And that also gives us guidance on that iterative process so we can hold ourselves accountable to say we went on this adventure or we made this investment or we built this thing from an idea to a tangible learning asset of some sort because we thought this would be true. And if it's not true, that's that sort of iterative continuous improvement loop of what do we keep doing so that we get closer and closer to achieving or surpassing what that expectation was. I think previously in my career, and I think for some other learning organizations, sometimes we think about what we're going to measure at the end. And then we're a little bit in service to what we've already created, where if you do it at the beginning, it really holds you accountable to, is there real value in what you're producing? And is the juice going to be worth the squeeze before you even invest time and energy into it? Also helps with that process of prioritizing because then you can start to say, different learning has different value targets and we're going to prioritize things to go after bigger things first or urgent things first versus everything feeling equally important.
yeah, absolutely. And money too, right? Budget.
Exactly.
Is this going
Resources,
to
even your
have the,
team's capacity of like, where do you want to put their mind share? Where do you want to put their energy and effort? If you can pick a couple big things, you'll get traction on those a lot faster. Also, that iterative process takes time. So you'll know, like, are the iterations valuable or are we at a good enough place to now set our sights on a new body of work?
yeah, absolutely. And also by thinking about the outcome first and the consideration of what the impact will be, setting your goals or KPIs and measuring, are we getting there? And then iterating along the way. That makes a lot of sense to me. I could talk all day about this because it's a big passion of mine, and this conversation's been really valuable as well. To the audience, are there any other tips or strategies that you would recommend? You mentioned you're starting to iterate on your own process. What are some of the lessons that you've learned for people who are maybe not where you are yet, but are going on that journey that they could try and avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things we always try to remind ourselves is as learning professionals, we're also learning too. So I would say give yourself some grace. Know that it's a journey that happens over time. You're not going to get there overnight. You're going to fall down. And sometimes when you fall down is when you're going to learn your best lessons. Um, Again, I do strongly, strongly, strongly believe in data and measurement. So if you can figure out why you're doing something and then tell the story of the value you're adding in context of the business, I think it will do a lot to engage your team. They'll see the value in what they're doing. It will help your business or your organization want to continue to invest in their employees. Will also give your learners a what's in it for them. So I think a lot of value comes from that. The process helps, right? So making sure you don't bite off more than you can chew, you don't chase everything down. Process lets you focus on what's most important in a really meaningful way versus being overwhelmed with there's so much going on, I just don't know where to put my time and energy. So some of those things sound really small, but again, when you put them together, I think they make it a journey we're on as learning professionals. They give us a way to organize the work, and they give us a way to tell the story of the value we add.
And I think an important thing that you mentioned as well is learning how to tell stories. It's a skill on its own, and everybody loves good stories. So the
Yeah.
better you
And
can tell
I
the
mean, again,
story.
like if you go back to like the beginning of learning, stories is where learning started, right? Stories were how people learned before there was any formal way of learning. That's how we passed information, was really good stories. It's also really good facilitation. You're telling stories that hook somewhere in someone's mind, and that's what they actually remember is the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Chrissy. I really appreciate the time you invested with us today, and sharing your story and your journey with us. And this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan. It was great talking to you.
Thanks for watching today's LearnOps Leadership episode. For more episodes like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.